Okay.
Okay. Dr. Proctor?
Yeah.
Introduce
Dr. Evans. Well, yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Well, Ernest, first of all, thank you for doing this. I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to do the forum with my counterpart. He decided at the last minute not to do it, but I appreciate you being flexible to do this instead. So for the folks that don't know me, my name's Pat Proctor. I spent 25 years in the Army defending our freedoms, including the America's first freedom, the right to keep and bear arms, and that's why I've been endorsed by the National Rifle Association. Also fighting to defend the right to life, including for the unborn. That's why I've been endorsed by Kansans for Life and by the Family Policy Alliance. I'm also an educator. I teach a couple days a week down at Wichita State University in the Homeland Security program. And I get the product of our K through 12 education system, and I'll tell you we're not getting our money's worth. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. And honestly, I know exactly where we need to make change if we're going to get those dollars back in the classroom. I think that's why all the education lobbies have endorsed my opponent. And finally, I'm a business owner. Me and my wife own Bontai here, where we're filming now, but also in Lawrence and Manhattan. You know, politicians talk about creating jobs, but I've actually done it. That's why I've been endorsed by the Kansas Chamber and by the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And, I am running because our town's dying. Too many of our neighbors are packing up and leaving. Too many of our businesses have rolled up their tents, and now our hospital's closed. And you know, I just want to do something to bring jobs and opportunity back here to Leavenworth so that we can get these people and these businesses and these services back.
Okay, well, thank you for those remarks. Listen, one question which is very much on both the national and state agenda is the issue of abortion and right to life. With the death of Justice Ginsburg and the likely confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, abortion is very much in the national news, but it's also an issue here at the state level because of the decision about a year ago by the state Supreme Court to largely remove remaining restrictions on abortion. Now, this has led to the amendment to the Kansas Constitution, value them both, and could you say a bit about what this amendment does, and then give us your position on it? Because
Yes, sir.
I just would say, talking to people around town in the past few days, the Barrett nomination and Ginsburg's death has really caused a lot of people to think very hard on this issue. So I'm sure people would like to get your views.
Yes, sir. So, as you know, in April of last year, the Kansas State Supreme Court inexplicably found the right to an abortion in the Kansas Constitution in the clause that guarantees the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what that decision did was put all of the common sense restrictions that are currently placed on abortion at risk. And we're talking about things that I think even a lot of pro-choice people would agree with, like we shouldn't have taxpayer funding of abortion, and parents should be notified before their teen goes and has an abortion. And so the Value Them Both amendment was raised by the legislature last year as a solution to restoring our rights through our legislators to place these common sense restrictions on abortion and to protect those restrictions that are already on the books. And the amendment only failed by 4 votes, and every single Democrat voted against the amendment. And you know, they raised all kinds of issues that, frankly, in my opinion, are red herrings. They said, well, this amendment's going to ban abortion. This amendment is not going to ban abortion. It's just going to take us back to April 2019 before the Supreme Court decision. And then they said, well, you know, this doesn't have any protections for the life of the mother or rape or incest. And that doesn't make sense, because those protections are already in all these statutes that restrict the practice of abortion. Those exceptions are already present in the law, and this amendment does nothing to change those exemptions that are already in existence. And so, as I guess you could probably figure out from listening to me talk about it, I absolutely will support this amendment when it comes up in the next session, and I guarantee it will. And that's why I've been endorsed by Kansas for Life.
Okay. As I said, this is an issue that a lot of people are very concerned about. Listen, I am an educator, as you know. I teach at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. I've taught there 22 years. And I get young people, sometimes they're still in high school or they're fresh out of it. And your thing you mentioned about K through 12, we are just not getting our money's worth.
Yeah.
You know, this is something that as an educator concerns a lot of us. We're spending enormous amounts of money on our public schools, and we're not graduating students who are ready for college.
Yeah.
What would you like to see done at the state level to start graduating people who really know what they're doing?
Absolutely. You stated the problem better than I possibly could. You know, that I'm all in favor of education spending because I'm an educator too. You know, I teach, just like you, I teach the product of the Kansas K through 12 education system. And you know, I'm frankly shocked by the level that some of our kids are coming out of Kansas high schools. You know, just the basics of grammar and being able to express themselves in the written word. It's really, frankly, a little shocking. And it's especially shocking because our education spending's gone up more than inflation every year. And again, I'm all in favor of education spending, but it's obviously not going to the right spot if we're spending more every year, but the quality of the education that our kids are earning or receiving is not commensurate with that increase in spending. You know, right now down in Shawnee Mission, there are 6 administrators making 6 figures in that school district. You know, that we hire in Kansas 4 administrators for every teacher that we hire in the state. And while spending's gone up well over the rate of inflation, teacher pay has actually gone down by 7% in real dollars over that same period. It's just insane. We've got to get the money that we're spending on our education into the classroom with our kids and with our teachers where it belongs. And there's a statute on the books that says that we're supposed to put 60% of education spending into the classroom, but there's no teeth to the statute. It's really ends up being a guideline, and a guideline that's ignored. So I think a great first step is to put some teeth to that statute so that we can ensure that our kids are getting the world-class education that they deserve.
Okay, you're absolutely right about, you know, I've noticed in the past few years talking to young people at KCC who were thinking about going into teaching that given how heavily in debt many of these young people are when they get out, and as you said, teachers' salaries in real terms have declined, many of them are being dissuaded from going into education because they just say, I can't spend the rest of my life paying off my loans. Listen, as you remember, you know, 10 years ago when we had the new census and we had reapportionment, the legislature was unable to come to agreement, and ultimately a judge drew the lines. There has been some speculation that maybe in the next session they will consider setting up an independent commission to draw the lines.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not. I'll just like to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on whether?
I absolutely do. This is going to be critical in the House District 41, which is Leavenworth and Fort Leavenworth. This issue is absolutely critical here because you probably don't remember it, but last time you voted for the local elections, if you had flipped over the back of your ballot, there was a constitutional amendment that we were supposed to vote yes and no on whether we were going to change the Kansas Constitution so that we count everybody on military installations and universities, whether they are or are not registered in Kansas. Because before, when the census came in, the Kansas state government would have to go through this painstaking process of cutting out all the people who weren't registered in Kansas. Well, we passed that amendment. So now, this next time when the census comes in, the size of this district is going to increase a great deal, because instead of only counting registered voters on Fort Leavenworth, we're going to be counting all of the people on Fort Leavenworth, whether they're registered in Kansas or not. And so it's very important how we address this issue of redistricting after the census. And I'll tell you, whether we're talking about how we respond to the coronavirus, or how we respond to tax issues, or how we respond to this question of redistricting, the fundamental principles that I always apply to each of these questions is, first, that there needs to be checks and balances. No one person or no one group of 3 or 4 people should ever make a decision, especially a decision that critical, that affects the lives of Kansans. And the second principle is that decisions that affect our lives should be made by elected representatives, not by bureaucrats. And so there's a process in the Kansas Constitution for how we do this. It's done by the House and the Senate, our elected representatives. There are checks and balances through both the governor, who can veto the plan, and the Supreme Court that I'm sure will be heard on their opinion of the plan and have a chance to weigh in on the plan. And so I don't see a need to set up this extra constitutional panel of bureaucrats that Governor Kelly suggested. I think that it's antithetical to how decisions are made in a democracy.
Okay, well that is a legitimate concern. As you know, a number of states, the states all generally have quite varying plans for redistricting, but I think you're right. I think that it is important that there be the democratic element.
Yeah.
Listen, you mentioned about our town, and you're right. I think for just driving around town, for many of the small businesses in this town, the pandemic, might be the final blow.
Yeah.
I'm just driving around town. I just see all sorts of buildings boarded up or closed.
It's tragic.
And I often here in town, I often go to Pullman's for dinner, and talking to a number of the staff there, a lot of them are just barely scraping by, and I'm thinking about leaving the area because of. What would you like to see done at the state, or in your capacity as a state rep, to bring business back to Leavenworth?
Thank you for the question. I'll tell you, this is priority number 1 for me. You might have seen it on my billboard, is to bring jobs and opportunity back to Leavenworth. That's why I'm running. And there's really 2 parts to this problem. The first part of the problem is that there, ironically, is not an available labor pool in this town to work. And I'll talk about that in a second. But also, it costs way too much to own and run a business in this town. So I was, the other day, I was sitting with Steve Jack at the Leavenworth County Development Commission, or Corporation, and he was talking about the pitch that he gives businesses to bring them to Leavenworth. And he said, the dirty little secret is that we tell people that there's about 6,000 or 8,000 people available to work, but the truth is those people aren't really available. And he didn't have to tell me that, because I live it. I see it every day. I live over on Kickapoo, right off of 7th Street, and so many of my neighbors are living this problem. They're trapped in generational poverty. Their lives are salary capped by programs like food stamps or disability, and they're not able to work because if they make too much money, they'll lose all those benefits. Tens of thousands of dollars of benefits, and so they ride that line at the salary cap. And you know what? They're not bad people, and I'm not sure if I were in their situation, I wouldn't do the same thing. We have got to get those folks back into the economy. We've got to build a pathway out of government dependency so that they can be full participants in the economy, or we're not going to get jobs here. If you're Amazon and you're looking to build a warehouse, are you going to build it here and then ship all your employees from Kansas City? Or are you going to build over in Kansas City where the property taxes are cheaper, over in Missouri, and all the available labor lives around you? And that's kind of the other piece of the problem is the property taxes. I'm not telling anybody at home anything they don't know if they've gotten a property tax bill, but our property taxes are out of control. In the state, there's a property tax lid. It's a law that says if they're going to raise the mill levy, they've got to have a vote of the people. But they figured out all kinds of ways to raise our property taxes without bringing it to the people. The first thing is the county assessors, and it's not just here in Leavenworth, it's all over Kansas, they're raising property values way faster than the rate of inflation because they don't have to come to the people for a vote. Here in the last 2 years, it's gone up like 8% and then 5% in the last 2 years. But over the last decade, it's just been astronomical how fast it's gone up. But then municipalities are also tacking on these little fees. Like here in Leavenworth, the mayor, my opponent, and the city commission, they cooked up this stormwater fee system. And it's burdensome on homeowners, but it's even more burdensome on business owners because the rates are even higher. And it creates an additional property tax that nobody gets to vote on, that businesses have to pay just to keep their doors open. And with businesses struggling so mightily with the coronavirus, we've got to make it cheaper to own and run a business if we want to bring jobs and opportunity back here. And that's why we've got to bring accountability back to our property tax system.
Listen, you mentioned the pandemic, COVID-19.
Yes, sir.
Listen, with this pandemic, there has been a lot of rethinking of healthcare systems, both at the national and state level. Are there any particular reforms you would like to see here in Kansas in the way we do healthcare in the state? You mentioned the closing of the hospital, and that's a problem all over the state. Hospitals are closing, and this is a real. So, have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I wish my opponent were here because the centerpiece of his campaign is Medicaid expansion, and he's talking all the Democrat talking points, and they just don't hold up to scrutiny. He'll say we're leaving money on the table. $4 billion that Kansas gave up because they didn't want to expand Medicaid. Well, President Trump is not sitting in the Oval Office with a big fat bag of cash waiting for us to call and say we've expanded Medicaid. That $4 billion gets tacked onto the national debt. And then on top of that, we still have to come up with $100 million in the middle of a pandemic when we've got a 1-point-something billion, like 1.3, I think I saw the other day, $1 billion shortfall in revenues. He'll also say, well, all the other states have done it. And I'm reminded of something my mom used to say about not jumping off a bridge just because my friends did. A lot of those states that have expanded Medicaid, they're trying to get out from under it now because it's bankrupting the states. Kentucky is facing huge budget shortfalls because way more people have applied for Medicaid. People that used to have insurance and used to have jobs that are taking a pay cut so that they can apply for Medicaid because overall they save money, but it's bankrupting the state. There are a lot of things that we can do to get at the problem of access. Before I move on, you said you're talking about the hospital. Another thing that my opponent and other Democrats are saying, well, our hospital wouldn't have closed if we expanded Medicaid. Well, that's just not true, and they know it. The director of the hospital was talking to me and Jeff Pittman and Mayor Griswold and a whole room full of people when he said that they were losing $9 million a year before the pandemic. This is last year. They were losing $9 million a year, and Medicaid expansion would have only gotten $7 million. Who knows how much money they're losing in the coronavirus when they can't see people for routine things. So instead of inviting the Trojan horse of Medicaid expansion into Kansas, there are a lot of other ways that we can get better access to medical care, which is what we're really trying to do. There are safety net clinics like St. Vincent down the street here. How about we take a portion of that $100 million we were going to dump down the whole Medicaid expansion and just write checks? We could just write checks to these hospitals that are already providing services to our indigent folks in town so that they can continue to do that. I cannot afford health care for my employees here because people aren't going to pay $50 for a plate of pad thai. So if somebody gets sick at my restaurant, I put them in my passenger seat. I drive them down to Judy Beck's clinic. She's an advanced practice registered nurse, and she has a little clinic that can deliver health care way cheaper than a hospital. Maybe we can make it cheaper for other nurses to open clinics the way she does to provide access to people for health care. And, if all else fails, how about we just give a tax credit to small businesses that have less than 50 people so that they can provide health care, just like my business, so we can provide health care. That way you're not putting a salary cap on people's lives, because that's what Medicaid does. It's just another chain on the back of my neighbors, keeping them trapped in poverty. Maybe we can, that they're now with that health care provided by small businesses, they're encouraged to keep their job and grow their lives instead of having a salary cap of their lives. And that's what we've got to do to provide better access to health care.
Listen, one question that I've gotten a number of people around town want to ask about, as you know, the country has witnessed a number of mass shootings in the past few years, and that has led to calls, at the state level, to ban further sales of the AR-15.
Yeah.
Now, I realize this is a controversial issue, but I just wondered, do you have any thoughts on that specific issue?
Well, my immediate thought is that both the U.S. and the Kansas Constitution make it absolutely clear that the right to keep and bear arms for the individual shall not be infringed. And so I'm confounded by how folks who advocate taking away people's guns can justify that without abandoning the fundamental principles and the principles that our founders held most dear. Violence in our major cities is a problem, but I think that the folks that are screaming loudest are screaming to defund the police, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. If we've got a crime problem, the answer is not to take away the police. The answer is greater funding for the police and more police on the street to enforce law and order. But I really think that a lot of those calls that we've heard for defunding the police are part of, frankly, a more sinister plan. The same extreme groups that my opponent says that he supports 100%, the same extreme groups that are advocating to defunding the police are also the groups that are tearing down our statues and trying to destroy our history and replace it with a narrative of systemic racism. They're the people that are trying to undermine our values of freedom and equality and justice and replace it with tribalism. And I've seen this before. I spent 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, and I've seen what happens when you destroy a nation of people and you rip them apart into tribes. They start ripping each other apart. And as long as I have a breath in my body to resist, I'm not going to let that happen to Kansas or America.
Well, this is about you, but I just would mention I too have been in some war zones. I was in Northern Ireland during the Civil War there, and I was in Lebanon during the Civil War there, and I fully agree with you about the dangers of what we sometimes call intersectionalism, dividing everybody into tribes. Northern Ireland and Lebanon were destroyed by tribalism and intersectionalism, and I get very concerned when people start demonizing any groups in the population and saying these are the good guys and these are the irretrievable. I often think, and I just would mention, I've seen you several times at the memorial service for Dr. King, and what I always think about Dr. King and the race issue was he saw all of us as brothers, and we've gotten away from that tragically.
And I don't mean to derail you from your questions, but I think you've hit it right on the head. America, the American nation, is unique in the history of the world. You're a political scientist, I'm a historian by training, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the American nation is unique in history. It's a group of people from every race, every ethnicity, every language, every religion that have come together under shared values and shared history to be one people dedicated to expanding freedom for everyone around the world. And if we lose that, the stakes for not just the country but the entire planet are so dire if we let people rip that apart.
Well, listen, my final question is from the very nice young lady, Rebecca Hollister, who you may remember.
Yes.
She wrote the Mind of the Millennial,
Yes.
and she's
and my opponent's campaign manager.
And she's
yes.
But she asked me a question that actually I would like to ask both of you,
Yeah.
which is, in the event you're elected, how will you deal with people who you disagree with. I mean, are you going to? Well, this is one of the things that as someone who's seen the ugly face of civil war, it concerns me about the demonization of people we disagree with in our country. So do you have any final thoughts on that?
You know what I do? Over the course of the last year, first of all, if you told me I was going to be running for office 2 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. I mean, this is something I really feel called to do because of my neighbors who are trapped in poverty, and I just feel it's morally wrong to keep them trapped in that state. It's morally wrong to keep people poor. But once that was laid on my heart, I started knocking on people's doors and talking to people about the possibility of my candidacy first, and then once I became a candidate, talk to them about what I want to do for our country and our state. I've knocked on over 3,500 doors now. I've talked to so many people, and they weren't all Republicans. I talked to Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated, libertarians. I have talked to people of every political stripe over the last year, just standing on their doorstep. And I'll tell you, we are not nearly as different as the mainstream media wants you to believe. And we are not nearly as tribal as those folks that are trying to rip our nation apart want us to be. When I stand on people's doorsteps and I'm talking to them and I'm hearing them talk about their hopes and their dreams for the future, for themselves and their families, we all want the same things. We want freedom and opportunity to pursue a better life for ourselves and for our families. But so many people in our town have been cut off from that opportunity. That in my neighborhood, I saw a statistic when I was talking to Steve Jack. 20% of our kids that go to our schools are living below the poverty line, and that number's growing. And if we don't do something to stop this downward slide, we're going to reach a tipping point where everybody with the money to leave is left, and we're going to be a permanently depressed, economically disadvantaged area. And once that happens, you're on the government dole, and all the businesses leave, and it's very hard to come back from that. And me and my wife are so deeply invested in this town and so deeply invested in our friends and our neighbors, we're not going to let that happen.
I just would conclude with this point that you mentioned about cities declining and decaying. In 1950, the city of Detroit had 2 million people. Now it has 700,000, and it lost 200,000 in the past decade. So cities can get into, we sometimes call it the Detroit death spiral, and that could happen in Leavenworth. So I think you're very right to be concerned about that. Well, listen, that's my series of questions, but I know you probably want to have some things to sum up. And
sure.
So, Dr. Proctor, thank you for taking the time for this interview, and your very candid and forthright answers. And so,
Dr. Evans, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it.
Yeah. So, I owe this town so much. Over 5 years, over 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 deployment to Afghanistan, this town was taking care of my family. And when the coronavirus economic shutdown hit, and we didn't know if we were going to be open in a week, this town threw its arms around our business and around our employees and all the other businesses in town. And it's a debt that I can never really repay. But it hasn't stopped me from trying. Me and my wife are heavily invested in the downtown, trying to restore downtown Leavenworth and provide jobs for our neighbors. We're heavily invested in North Leavenworth, refurbishing houses so that our neighbors have a great place to live and raise their families. But when the coronavirus economic shutdown devastated our economy, I was just dismayed and disheartened by how deeply it hit all of my neighbors. And so I got together with a couple other small business owners, and we kicked off this food aid effort that we call Coronavirus Relief. And we were taking care of over 100 families a week at the peak of it. But the problems that we've talked about here, the people fleeing our town, all the businesses closing, the hospital now closed, this death spiral that you talked about that Leavenworth seems like it's on the verge of are too deep for volunteerism or for handouts. If we're going to save our town before it's too late, we have got to get jobs and opportunity going back here in Leavenworth again. We've got to free all our neighbors from generational poverty so that we can get them back into the economy. We've got to bring accountability back to our property taxes so we can lower the cost of owning and running a business. That's how we're going to bring jobs and opportunity back to Leavenworth. And I can't do it without your help. So early voting started. You go right down here to the courthouse, you knock on the door or you call the number and they let you in. It takes 5 minutes. Get out there and vote and help me save our town.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor.
Thank you.